Have you ever felt that being alone meant something was wrong with you? That choosing solitude made you look cold, broken, or incomplete? Society tells women that their value is tied to their relationships, that without a partner, a ring, or children, they're somehow lacking. But what if that's the biggest lie you've ever been told? In this video, we're going to challenge everything you think you know about women who live alone. With the guidance of Carl Jung's powerful psychological insights, we'll explore how solitude is not loneliness, it's liberation. You'll discover the sacred journey that unfolds when a woman stops performing and starts becoming. We'll talk about the animus, the masculine energy within every woman, and why facing it is the key to true empowerment. You'll learn about the shadow self, how societal myths shape our identity, and why so many women today are redefining femininity on their terms. This isn't just about being single, it's about becoming whole. If you've ever questioned your path, your independence, or your worth in a world that judges women for being alone, stay with us. By the end of this video, you might just realize that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. Carl Jung, with his profound insight into the human soul, warned us that solitude is not always the sanctuary. It appears to be. It is a double-edged sword, a space that can birth deep healing and self-realization, or one that can quietly harden into isolation, repression, and spiritual stagnation. The line between the two is razor thin, and it all hinges on intention. The key, Jung emphasized, is choice. If a woman retreats into solitude out of fear of being hurt again, fear of abandonment, fear of disappointment, or if her aloneness is shaped by unresolved wounds that she refuses to face, then solitude becomes less of a sanctuary and more of a shell. And that shell, though it may feel safe, slowly begins to suffocate her. Growth stops. The soul contracts. The defenses she builds to protect herself begin to form walls that not only keep the pain out, but also keep love, intimacy, and transformation from ever reaching her. But when a woman chooses solitude consciously, when she embraces it not to hide, but to heal, not to escape, but to evolve, everything changes. Her solitude becomes a sacred crucible, a space of alchemical fire, where she is no longer defined by others' expectations or roles. She no longer waits for external validation. She no longer needs a mirror to know who she is. Instead, she learns to rely on her voice, the one that may have been silenced by years of pleasing others, of shrinking herself to fit into someone else's story. She reclaims her breath, her rhythm, her worth. And from this holy solitude, she begins to write a new narrative, one that is unapologetically her own. But this path is not linear, and it is not without darkness. This is where Jung's concept of shadow work becomes not only relevant, but essential. The shadow, as Jung described, is everything within us that we have exiled, everything we deny, reject, or suppress. Not because it's wrong, but because it didn't fit the image we thought we had to maintain to be loved or accepted. For a woman walking the path of solitude, the shadow is never far behind. It can show up in subtle ways, a sudden wave of shame when she declines an invitation, a sense of guilt when she prioritizes her peace over someone else's expectations. But it can also be loud and terrifying. The fear of being forgotten, the deep ache of not being touched, the whispers of society that label her as too much, too difficult, and too independent for her good. These voices, whether from others or internalized long ago, can become haunting echoes in the quiet of her home. And sometimes, the most painful part is that they come not from enemies, but from loved ones who simply don't understand the sacredness of her choice. Why are you still alone? Don't you want someone? You're so strong, but don't you ever get lonely? And yes, she does get lonely. Let's not romanticize the path too much. Some nights feel endless, and mornings when the silence feels heavy. But these moments, rather than signs of failure, become invitations to deeper truths. When she feels the weight of loneliness and chooses to sit with it rather than run from it, she begins to transmute that loneliness into sacred solitude. She begins to understand that being alone doesn't mean being unloved, and that her longing for connection is not a weakness, but a testament to her humanity. Sometimes, even her independence becomes part of the shadow. It becomes a sword she clings to so tightly that it cuts her off from softness, from receptivity, from being held. And in those moments, she must ask herself, am I protecting my peace, or am I afraid to be vulnerable again? This is the delicate balance she must learn to walk, embracing her strength without weaponizing it, holding her independence without using it as a fortress, and honoring her solitude without denying her need for intimacy and community. Because spiritual growth doesn't mean abandoning human needs. It means learning how to hold them with wisdom and compassion. And it's here, in this brave, raw space, where the deepest growth unfolds. When she faces her shadows and brings them into the light, not to shame them, but to understand them, she becomes whole. She learns that wholeness isn't perfection. It's integration. It's being able to say, yes, I am powerful and I am tender. I am self-sufficient and I long to be seen. I am content alone and I still desire connection. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not about using solitude to pretend she doesn't need anyone. This is about spiritual integration. It is about choosing wholeness over performance, depth over distraction, and self-respect over approval. Because at the end of the day, the woman who chooses to live alone, truly live alone, in her truth, in her wholeness, is not running away from the world. She is walking toward herself. And in doing so, she becomes not just someone who lives alone, but someone who has come home to herself. This is the paradox at the very heart of Carl Jung's teachings, so subtle, yet so transformative. Wholeness is never about becoming flawless. It's not about rising above the messy, complicated, often contradictory parts of ourselves. No, true wholeness, Jung said, comes only when we dare to look into the darkest corners of our psyche, the places we were taught to fear, suppress, or be ashamed of, and bring them into the light with love, honesty, and compassion. And in this light, the act of living alone is no longer just a lifestyle choice. It becomes something sacred. It becomes a rite of passage, an initiatory journey. A woman who walks this path with open eyes and a willing heart isn't just passing time, she is crossing thresholds within herself that most never even know exist. She doesn't emerge from this process polished or perfectly self-sufficient in the way society sometimes idolizes: cold, untouchable, strong at the expense of softness. No, she becomes something infinitely more real. She becomes authentic. Authenticity has nothing to do with performance. It means she no longer runs from her shadow, nor does she let it take the wheel. She learns to stand in the holy tension of her humanity. She holds the paradoxes with grace, the ache of solitude and the longing for connection, the joy of freedom and the tenderness of vulnerability. She doesn't choose one over the other. She learns to hold both. And in that sacred in-between space, she begins to see the deeper truth she was never broken to begin with. She doesn't need to be completed. She already is. One of the most toxic and persistent myths society projects onto women who live alone is the assumption that they must be lonely. Something must be missing, as if their lives are a waiting room for something, or someone to arrive and finally make it whole. As if solitude automatically equals sadness. But that's a tragic misunderstanding. Loneliness and loneliness are not the same. They are two very different emotional landscapes. Loneliness is a deep craving for connection that feels unmet. It is an ache, a void, a sense of being unseen, unheard, or unloved even in a crowded room, but aloneness conscious. Chosen aloneness is not a wound. It is a sanctuary. It is where a woman meets her truest self without distraction, without compromise. She sits in the silence not because no one is calling, but because she is finally listening to the voice that matters most, her own. And Jung would say, she isn't rejecting connection at all. She's redefining it. She is no longer desperate for crumbs of attention or fleeting validation. She has found a connection on a deeper, more sacred level. Connection with her inner world, with the divine, with the rhythms of nature, with the soul's longing for wholeness. This woman may not always be understood by others. Her path may confuse those still tethered to conventional ideas of worth, family, romance, or success. But the truth is, she is living in alignment with a deeper rhythm, and that rhythm is her own. She's not lonely, she's sovereign. She's not empty, she's expansive. She's not waiting, she's becoming. And the longer she walks this path, the clearer it becomes. This is not exile. This is homecoming. Yes, she may feel lonely at times. Let's not sugarcoat the truth. There are moments when the silence stretches too long, when no one checks in, when a holiday passes without a phone call or a shared meal. But these moments, though real and sometimes heavy, do not define her. Because alongside that loneliness, something far more extraordinary unfolds. She discovers a profound, soul-deep ability to feel at home within herself. And that, in this world of constant noise and distraction, is a rare and sacred gift. It's a skill, yes, a skill that many people never cultivate, especially those who leap from relationship to relationship, terrified of being alone, terrified of what might surface in the quiet. She, on the other hand, has learned to face that quiet, to breathe in it, to live in it, and not just survive it, but grow stronger, wiser, and more rooted in her truth because of it. And yet, even in the face of this strength, society continues to project its outdated stories onto her. One of the most insidious misconceptions is the belief that a woman living alone must be rejecting her femininity, as if being a woman requires constant entanglement with others, as if her value only shines through caretaking, nurturing, or romantic attachment, as if her femininity begins and ends in how others perceive or need her. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. But this could not be further from the truth. Carl Jung's work gently yet powerfully dismantles this illusion. True femininity, from a Jungian perspective, is not about fulfilling roles. It's not about being a wife, a girlfriend, a mother, or a muse. It is an essence. It is a force that flows from within a sacred energy, rooted in receptivity, intuition, emotional depth, creativity, and fierce, unshakable inner strength. And here's the part society forgets to see. When a woman chooses to be alone, she is not abandoning her femininity. She is often deepening it. She is reclaiming it not as something filtered through the eyes of others, but as something raw, untouched, and real. She begins to understand her cycles, her emotions, her body, and her wisdom on a level that could never have been accessed while playing a part in satisfying someone else's expectations. In Solitude, she returns to her rhythm. She creates, not to be praised, but because it brings her joy. She dances, not to seduce, but to feel alive in her skin. She listens, not to please, but to honor her inner voice. But let's be honest, the journey isn't without wounds. Real struggles persist. Societal pressure doesn't fade just because she's found her power. It often grows louder, more passive-aggressive, and more insidious. It can sneak into family gatherings, where well-meaning relatives ask, "When will you settle down?" their tone laced with concern, as if her life hasn't started yet, as if she's stuck in some prelude to a more valid story. The unloved woman trope still haunts cultural narratives. Films, books, and gossip columns often portray single women past a certain age as tragic, bitter, or simply invisible. A woman alone, by choice, is seen not as whole, but as someone to be pitied, someone waiting, someone who must have been hurt, must have been left, must have failed. And perhaps the cruelest consequence of this constant messaging is that some women begin to believe it. They start to internalize the world's distorted lens. They question themselves. They wonder if their independence is a mask for brokenness, if their solitude is just loneliness in disguise, if their strength has somehow made them undesirable or hard to love. But here's what no one tells them. Questioning is part of the process. Because when a woman dares to walk a path so few truly understand, she will inevitably confront the shadows of doubt. And that's okay. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of awakening. The truth is that choosing to live alone in a world that worships coupledom is an act of spiritual rebellion. It is a declaration that she will not define her life by someone else's timeline, that her value is not tied to a ring, a partner, or a dinner for two, that she refuses to abandon herself in pursuit of external validation. And in that refusal, she begins to shape something radical, a life on her terms, a life where her femininity is no longer a performance, a life where her strength doesn't need to be softened to make others comfortable, a life where her solitude isn't a sentence but a sanctuary, because, in the end, the woman who chooses to live alone is not alone in spirit. She is accompanied by every version of herself she had to lose to find this one. And that is the kind of love no one can take away. This is where the distinction between healthy solitude and isolation becomes not just important, but essential. It's the quiet, invisible line that separates liberation from limitation, growth from stagnation, and truth from illusion. Healthy solitude is a conscious choice, a dynamic, life-affirming space where a woman chooses to engage with herself and the world on her terms. It's not about cutting ties with others, but about reconnecting with herself first so deeply and honestly that every future connection becomes more meaningful, more authentic, and more alive. In healthy solitude, she wakes each day not with the weight of absence, but with the breath of clarity. She nourishes her spirit, tends to her needs, and builds a rhythm that honors her truth. She creates, reflects, and connects with nature, with spirit, with her own evolving inner voice. Her solitude becomes a dance, not a hiding place, a sacred pause, not a full stop. Isolation, on the other hand, is a different beast entirely. It often masquerades as strength, but beneath the surface, it is fear in disguise. It is not chosen with power, but born out of pain. It is the quiet retreat from life itself, a defensive posture forged in past betrayal, heartbreak, trauma, or rejection. It is the shutting down of possibility, the hardening of the heart, and the closing of doors not just to others, but to the self. Carl Jung warned against this very trap. His work never encouraged the escape from human connection. Quite the opposite. Jung emphasized that the highest goal of psychological and spiritual development isn't to live untouched by others, but to engage with the world from a place of inner wholeness. To form relationships not out of need or fear, but from a deep, unwavering sense of self. Because only then can love become real. Only then can a connection be clean and sacred, not entangled in projection and pain. And so, a woman must be brutally honest with herself. Is she alone because she is standing in her power, or because she is still hiding from her pain? Is she living from her center, or protecting her wounds from ever being touched again? Because a woman who isolates may appear composed on the outside, but deep inside, she may be avoiding the very shadows that long to be healed. She may be resisting vulnerability, intimacy, the beautiful messiness of being truly seen. And while the silence may feel safe for a time, it can also become a quiet prison where the heart grows quieter, the dreams dimmer, and life starts to shrink. But a woman who chooses solitude with intention is walking a completely different path, She is not hiding from her shadows. She is staring them down. She is welcoming discomfort, asking the hard questions, listening to the parts of herself that once went unheard. She is peeling back the layers of her identity, not to erase who she was, but to discover who she really is underneath all the noise. And that is not easy work. That is not Instagram-worthy healing. That is soul excavation. That is sacred warriorship. The challenge, then, isn't only about enduring the myths society throws at her, the pitying glances, the passive comments, the assumptions about her worth. The real challenge is an internal one, to stay awake of her motives, to be vigilant with herself, to ask, again and again, am I here because I'm running from something, or because I'm running toward myself? That question is everything. It is the doorway, the compass, the reckoning. Because the answer to that question will determine everything about her life. It will shape the tone of her solitude. It will shape the energy she carries. It will shape her future relationships, her creativity, and her capacity for joy. It will decide whether her aloneness becomes a prison that keeps her small or a portal that opens her to radical self-knowledge, unshakable authenticity, and the deepest kind of freedom. And when that answer comes, not from the mind, but from the gut, the body, the soul, she will know. She will know whether she's shrinking or expanding, whether she's numbing or transforming, whether she's hiding or finally coming home to herself. Carl Jung's exploration of feminine archetypes reveals a truth so profound, so timeless, that it still pulses with relevance today. The journey of solitude has always been an initiatory path to feminine wisdom. It is not new. It is not radical. It is not even rare, though society would have us believe otherwise. It is ancient, sacred, embedded in the bones of myth and memory. At the center of this journey is the Great Mother archetype. She is often remembered only for her nurturing, for her fertility, for her capacity to give life to others. But Jung understood that every archetype has a shadow, a deeper, often forgotten layer. And in the shadow of the Great Mother lies a vital lesson: the power of self-nourishment. The ability not just to give to others, but to give to oneself tenderness, protection, rest, and renewal. When a woman lives alone, she does not reject this archetype. She transforms it. She becomes both the mother and the child in her sacred narrative. She rocks herself to sleep when grief comes uninvited. She whispers courage into her chest when fear grips her heart. She prepares her meals, creates beauty in her space, and tends to her inner life like a garden. This is no small thing. This is holy work. Likewise, the wise woman archetype, sometimes called the crone, the seer, or the oracle, does not arise through romantic love or social performance. She does not become wise by checking boxes or pleasing others. Her wisdom is forged in the fire of solitude. It is the alchemy of silence, of being stripped of distractions, of being left alone with the truth. She listens, not to others, but to the voice that rises from her bones. She looks into the mirror of her soul and does not flinch. And in doing so, she becomes whole. This is the sacred paradox. When a woman steps away from traditional roles, when she stops defining herself by who she nurtures, who she serves, and who she belongs to, she often discovers the truest expression of those roles within herself. She embodies the essence of the feminine, not because she is partnered or mothering or desired, but because she has remembered her source. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Mythology and psychology meet at this powerful crossroads to remind us self-sufficiency has always been a spiritual path. And it is not a lonely one, it is a luminous one. Throughout time, women who chose solitude were not always outcasts. In many ancient cultures, they were revered, respected, even feared for their wisdom, their connection to the divine, their refusal to be tamed. Think of Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt. who refused the chains of marriage and instead roamed the wilderness, wild and whole. Her independence was never about lack, it was about devotion to her truest self. She knew the forest better than any man. She understood cycles, instincts, and silence. She was not waiting, she was becoming. Or consider the oracle at Delphi, the Pythia, who lived alone high above the world and offered prophetic guidance to kings and warriors. Her solitude was not loneliness, it was listening. It was a sacred role, earned and chosen. Her wisdom came not from worldly engagement, but from radical stillness. And in that stillness, she became a vessel for something beyond herself. These archetypes call to us still. They whisper through the pages of history and myth. What you call loneliness may be the beginning of your awakening. What the world fears in solitude, the soul recognizes as initiation. Historically, solitude has always been recognized as a sacred space, a fertile void where transformation occurs. In Jung's framework, this retreat from the outer world is essential to individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. When a woman withdraws from external definitions, wife, daughter, lover, caregiver, she does not disappear. She begins to emerge. Layer by layer, mask by mask, she peels away what was never truly hers. And the modern woman who walks this path, who says no to the expectations, the timelines, the shoulds, is not lost. She is participating in an ancient lineage. She is reclaiming feminine power, not through rebellion, but through remembrance. Today, the same fire that burned in Artemis still burns in women who choose a quieter life. The same wisdom that once echoed in Delphi now speaks through the solitude of a woman sitting alone at her kitchen table, journaling through her grief, sipping tea in peace, creating something beautiful with her own hands. This isn't deprivation, it's devotion. It's not exile, it's initiation. Because when a woman chooses to walk alone, not out of bitterness, not out of fear, but out of reverence for her own becoming, she aligns herself with a lineage far older than any modern myth of coupledom. She steps into a story written in the stars, remembered by the earth, and carried forward by every woman who has ever chosen to honor her inner world above all else. And that, perhaps, is the most radical act of all. Or consider Virginia Woolf, a woman ahead of her time whose powerful essay, A Room of One's Own, gave voice to a truth. Women have felt for centuries, but were rarely allowed to name, that to create, to think, to be, a woman must have a space that is truly hers. Not just a physical room, but a psychic room, an inner sanctuary, a corner of the world, free from interruption, where her thoughts can unfurl without judgment, and her soul can speak freely. Woolf gave language to what Jung would later describe as the psychological necessity of solitude, a condition required not only for artistic genius, but for the birth of the authentic feminine self. These women didn't simply choose to live alone. They transformed solitude into a crucible, a place where raw emotion, old wounds, and half-formed dreams could melt down and re-emerge as wisdom, clarity, and creative fire. They weren't just escaping the world, they were forging themselves in the quiet. They were finding truth in the stillness. They were becoming whole. Even in mythology, we see the same archetype again and again, the woman who stands outside of society's rules, feared for her power, yet sought for her wisdom. Take Baba Yaga, the terrifying, wise old crone of Slavic folklore. She lives deep in the forest, far from the world of men, in a hut that moves on chicken legs. She is both feared and revered. Children are warned about her, yet heroes seek her guidance. Baba Yaga represents the sacred wildness of the feminine, the wisdom that cannot be tamed, the insight that comes from living outside of convention. Her solitude isn't a weakness, it is her source. And this archetype is not just found in ancient myths. It is alive today, pulsing in the lives of countless modern women who are quietly, courageously walking their solitary paths. Women who have stepped off the well-worn road of expectation and into the uncharted forest of their becoming. Think of the artist who, after years of distraction and disconnection, finally finds her creative voice not in the noise of the crowd, but in the silence of her studio, where she paints from her wounds and dreams. Or the executive who, after climbing ladders and chasing titles, finally begins to hear herself not through the echo chamber of boardroom decisions, but in long walks alone, where she learns to trust her inner compass. Or the healer who discovers her gift not in the doing, but in the being, in the spaciousness of stillness, where intuition becomes louder than logic and where divine guidance finally has room to speak. These stories are not anomalies. They are the continuation of an ancient lineage. They are the living proof of Jung's conviction that some truths, the deepest, most transformative truths, can only be found in solitude. Not because people are unnecessary, but because the noise of the world often drowns out the soul's whisper. These women aren't running away from life. They are moving deeper into it, peeling back the layers, unlearning the lies, and uncovering the power that was buried beneath obligation and performance. They show us that solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the space where authentic connection begins. And in this space, this quiet, holy, often misunderstood space, a woman meets herself not as a role, not as a reflection, but as a force, a source, a sovereign being with the power to create, to heal, to know, and to be. One woman described her solo years as the time I stopped performing womanhood and started experiencing it. Another quietly reflected, in the silence, I met parts of myself I didn't even know I had abandoned. These aren't just passing comments, they're profound revelations. They are echoes of a shared awakening that so many women experience when they finally step away from the noise, the roles, the masks, and into the sacred space of being alone. These testimonials speak to a universal, often unspoken truth, that the woman who dares to walk alone eventually realizes she was never truly solitary. She was entering into deep communion, not with another person, but with her whole self, her soul, her essence, her truth. In the stillness, she doesn't feel abandoned. She feels gathered by the very parts of herself that had been left behind in the rush to please, to serve, to belong. And this is where the journey takes a radical, luminous turn. Because what if living alone isn't about lack at all? What if it's not a sign of what's missing, but rather a sign of what's finally being reclaimed? What if solitude is the doorway, not to emptiness, but to the most profound connection of all, the connection to the divine feminine within? This is not fantasy. This is ancestral memory. The woman who chooses this path does not walk it alone in spirit. She walks in the footsteps of priestesses who tended temples in silence, of mystics who heard God in the quiet, of poets, healers, and visionaries who found their voice not in applause, but in solitude. Her path is ancient, and her silence is not a void, but a vessel. In this space, this room of her own, whether literal or symbolic, she stops looking outward for definition. She listens inward, and what she hears is sacred, the whisper of intuition, the fierce roar of boundaries, the sacred pulse of creativity, the knowing, the remembering. Her solitude becomes not a lonely place, but a holy one, a place where the divine feminine, the source of life, wisdom, and renewal, rises from within her like a spring. And in Jungian terms, she achieves something few ever truly reach, not just independence, not just survival, but individuation, the ultimate homecoming, the moment when the many fragmented selves she once was daughter, lover, caretaker, achiever, are gathered into one whole being. She no longer needs to be defined by roles or relationships. She is herself, undivided, integrated, alive. This is not a tragic story. This is a triumph, a quiet, radiant revolution She is no longer a woman alone. She is a woman who returned to herself. So now we invite you to pause and reflect. What have you learned from this journey into the sacred solitude of the feminine soul? Have you discovered that solitude isn't about emptiness, but about deep connection with your true self? Have you come to see that living alone can be a powerful act of remembrance, of reclaiming the divine feminine that has always lived within you? Or perhaps, like so many women before you, you've realized that silence isn't something to fear. It's where your clearest voice finally speaks. We would love to hear from you. What is one thing you've learned from this video that resonated deeply with your heart? And what is one small practice you're inspired to bring into your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else who is walking this very same path. If you liked this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your voice matters. Your journey matters. And above all, you matter. Until next time, keep walking boldly toward yourself.